might AIs be conscious? If these things do become really powerful, will we be able to direct them effectively? Will we be able to control them effectively? Would it even be ethical to try to control them if in some ways they're smarter or even wiser than us? There is, in my view, basically radical uncertainty about how this is going to go.
Welcome everyone on this new episode of Let's Talk AI. Super happy here today with Nathan Labenz. How are you doing, Nathan?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm a big fan of your podcast and of what you share and the value you share at the Cognitive Revolution. I have many questions for you, but maybe let's start simple. Could you introduce yourself? Like, how would you describe yourself in like 2 sentences?
I often say these days, simply, I study AI, and that's increasingly more than a full time job. So nobody can keep up with everything that's going on in AI, but I'm giving it a very, the strongest effort that I can. And there's just a lot of different activities for me that kind of roll up under that single umbrella of studying AI. So some of them are application building, kind of entrepreneurial, advising other people who are building stuff, and then the podcast is one big both input and output, hopefully, for that project too. The input is, of course, I get to talk to lots of people who are doing super interesting work in AI, and the output is I get to share those conversations with others.
That's awesome. All right. So I have two fun questions following up that, which is your state of the art and maybe do a retrospective of what you've been doing, how you started. So what do I mean by state of the art, right? I'm not going to ask you, hey, what's your favorite LLM of the moment or things like that. No, it's more about what are you curious about? Like what drives you? What are you trying to achieve? Or so of course AI and you're sharing a lot with your podcast and online, but do you have one thing that maybe describes your current mission, if I can say it like that?
Yeah, my personal mission really is to develop and hopefully maintain the most accurate, up to date understanding of what is going on with AI right now that I possibly can. And kind of anything else is sort of a bonus from that. There with the company Waymark that I started and I'm still involved in, there our mission is to apply the latest and greatest AI technology for the benefit of ultimately a small business audience, and we help them create marketing and advertising video content. But increasingly, I think of that as kind of one way that I remain very grounded. I think these technologies are so weird. There's so much hype. There's so much, it's very easy to confuse oneself as to what the current state of them is. So I always want to be very grounded and hands-on in application. But the big mission is really just to understand what's going on. I think so much is happening at the same time and it's touching everything. It started, and I was kind of fortunate that I happened to be working in marketing technology when the AIs were really only still useful there. And over the last 3-4 years, they've gone from something that could help you write a little bit of marketing copy to something now that is helping frontier scientists do their best work. And I just happened to be, I was primed for it. I had a longstanding interest in AI, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time to be an early adopter and get practical value and see a little bit of where things were going. And I know that it's just so much just to make something work that very few people have the luxury, which I've been very fortunate to be able to kind of carve out a little space for myself to try to take this zoomed out view and see, hopefully the broader landscape. I think that is really needed, but I'm also very mindful of the fact that like nobody can keep up at this point. So it's definitely more than a one-person job to develop that very broad worldview.
So I guess I would be super curious about a retrospective of what you've been up to. I think one of the recent podcasts that I've listened of yours, you had some Google's people working at Google's, and you discussed some models and how you were implementing them. So when you listen to podcasts like this, and I'm mentioning this one because it comes on top of my mind, but I could like listen to other podcasts. This kind of us speaking about those concepts, we give flavor and colors, which when you apply it, like you say, it's just like, oh, you're just referring to this specific thing. And so I totally agree in a way that being grounded and applying those LLMs and understanding like not only the concept but applying them and understand how they work is very important. And so I found that very interesting. But to your point, so you said that okay, you're still doing things hands-on, MVPs, if I'm not mistaken. So how did it all start? Maybe we can go a little bit back and you can share some key moments of what you've been doing and what to until what you're currently doing and the lessons along the way, maybe.
Yeah, I'd say the long story short, I've always had, or maybe, for 15 years at least, I've had an interest in AI. I kind of got into, not in a super deep way, because I kind of still carried on with a reasonably normal career in entrepreneurship to the degree that that's normal. But I did have an interest in things like Kurzweil, what at the time seemed like kind of crazy, very speculative future. The singularity is near. Looking at those graphs back in the mid 2000s that he drew that showed the exponential curve just keeps going, and look at this, by early 2020s we have human level AI, and obviously it keeps going from there. At that time I was sort of like, this seems unlikely to be true, but is definitely very interesting. And it was one of really very few visions for the future that were on offer. I still, to this day, I often say the scarcest resource is a positive vision for the future. And I've just been struck by kind of how throughout my lifetime we really haven't had much leadership from really any corner that tries to give people a positive vision for how future life could be different from current life. That we used to have more of that, and it's somehow been lost. But there are a few of these voices. So Kurzweil was one that definitely caught my attention. The flip side of Kurzweil is Eliezer Yudkowsky, and they kind of were sort of a yin and yang in my personal education about AI, where Kurzweil was all about, look at these smooth curves and this is going to happen and it's going to be amazing. And Eliezer was kind of like, that might happen. It potentially could happen with a lot less resources, and it potentially could happen in a really negative way, because there's no law of nature that says that the super powerful AI that you're talking about emerging or creating or somehow coming into existence is going to be compatible with the things that we care about. And in fact, long-term history is full of things going extinct, right? And even if we just look at ourselves, we humans have caused like mass extinction of other species, including our closest relatives in the in the ancestral tree, right? We've driven all of our closest cousins to extinction. So it's not like a huge leap to think that if we were to create something more powerful than us, that this could go very badly for us. So I also took that very seriously. But the whole thing sort of seemed like pretty distant future, and it wasn't obvious or not whether we were on the exponential curve that Kurzweil described in those years. So I basically just went on and did other things, pursued entrepreneurship, started a couple of businesses, built a couple of products. Always kind of kept an eye out for, is the AI like starting to get good? When news would break, certainly, the DeepMind developments of the 2010s, when they had their AlphaGo breakthroughs, and certainly when things like AlphaFold started to happen, I was like, this is really remarkable. Still wasn't really applicable to my life or my product work very much at all. And we did try. I remember in 2017, building products for small businesses, one of the hardest things is just they've got a million things to do, a million people trying to offer them a specialized tool for whatever, problem they think that the small business has. And they don't have time for this stuff. They really need things. What they really want in most cases is service, not tools. And we were building a tool, and I always felt like, man, if we could do anything to make this more of a service, it would be super valuable. But the challenge, of course, with services is it doesn't scale very well. It's expensive. So I was always on the lookout for AIs that might be able to help. And we tried a few things, but mostly they just didn't work. The best we were able to do for a long time was maybe kind of put a business into a category, and that would then allow us to maybe make some decent recommendations of kind of certain directions they should go. But there wasn't really anything available that could truly help us understand who the business was, or make any sort of detailed recommendations, or certainly create actual new content for them. That was always just totally out of reach. In 2017, I remember there was a paper published on abstractive summarization, which at that time was the state of the art. And what was out there in terms of like APIs or whatever was extractive summarization. You could give a block of text to certain models, and they would basically try to identify which of these sentences in this broader paragraph are the most important, and they would just extract them, verbatim, and then give them, to you. These are the most important sentences. So that's extractive summarization. That like kind of worked, but that's usually not what you want. And for content creation, we didn't want to like grab a couple of sentences off a small business website. What we really wanted to do was understand what that small business was about and try to help them tell their story. The abstractive summarization paper was a first moment where it looked like, this is interesting because this is now actually rephrasing what is going on. It's not just a word for word slice out of the content that already exists, but there is a, this abstraction process. We couldn't get that to work. At the time, people didn't publish their models. They didn't publish their data sets. We didn't have enough data to train something from scratch. I learned all that the hard way because I did hire a grad student to come in and do a little special project. Basically, it just didn't work. So I was like, okay, it seems like we might be getting close, but not yet, to where it's going to work for us. And then, of course, like so many entrepreneurs, over the last few years, for me, GPT-3 and especially GPT-3 fine tuning was the moment when it actually hit the threshold where we went from looks promising but not quite useful yet for the task I need it to do, to the point where it was definitely able to add real value for our users. So for the last 3 years now, once that threshold was hit, and there've been, of course, like many more thresholds hit since then, but once that threshold was hit in 2021, GPT-3 came out in 2020, but they didn't have the fine tuning. We couldn't get the raw model to work quite well enough, but with a little fine tuning, that opened up our use case. And since then, our journey with the product has been, I describe it now as from do it yourself, which is what we originally had, to now done for you by AI. And I think that is just, an absolute wave that's coming through almost all, if not, all software in some way, shape, or form. Because, the reason like so many, not all software exists, of course, but software is a big category. But the reason so much of these tools exist is because people, want something done. Ideally, they would just wave a magic wand and have it done for them, in a high quality way. But that's always been expensive. And now AI, because it is 1%, or, depending on the exact scenario, could be 0.1% the cost of hiring a human to do that work. It opens up a totally new paradigm. So people used to have to come in and, input their data and, figure out what they wanted to create. And we heard from people all the time, I just don't have that many ideas. And, the blank page, the blank canvas is really hard for me. To now, literally, you can just, as a user of our product, give us the website for your business. We go out and grab all that information, use language models to understand it, summarize it, transform it in various ways, and then present back to you, okay, here's a fully formed advertising marketing video for your business. We call it now a watch first experience. You don't have to make choices. You don't have to select. You don't have to write. You don't have to tinker. We give you something fully formed, script, imagery, even voiceover layered on top of that, truly a fully formed package. And then you can react to that. And you can, and we find, it's just a night and day experience where people are like, they may love it. They may hate it. If they hate it, they can, of course, always, create another one with a new prompt. They may like it, but want to make some tweaks. And we still have all those same tools that we've always had in terms of editing and, making the fine grain revisions. But we find that people are much happier to do that when they see something that kind of inspires them. And they're like, oh, that's really close, but I want to make a couple tweaks. That's really easy for people to do. So the usage of the product has, dramatically risen, and we've, that riding this sort of AI technology wave has been really good for our business. And it's given me the, certainly a earlier than most perspective on what I think is coming to, just about all corners of not just business actually, but society and really life as a whole in the not too distant future as well.
Awesome. Yes, thanks you for this great overview. From all the questions I could ask right now, and there are a lot, maybe your team had access to Sora or those latest models, but I think I have two questions related to content creation, not only because this is the last things that you mentioned, but because of the recent posts of Sora that appeared. And so two things I'm super curious about, right? Just to develop a little bit more. I always love to hear what other entrepreneurs are learning from their users or their experiences. What are the trends that you're seeing in content creation that are interesting to you? If you can speak on that, like what are people more curious about? I don't know if you had some cool insights for us about the frequency of people wanting to leverage this tool and the feedback from maybe their audiences, like how good did this video perform that we prepared to you, how on brand line, like this kind of analytics. I think super curious if you can share anything regarding like maybe user engagement or feedback from clients, or overall in the industry, how do you see the content creation game changing? And of course, the question about how do you feel with Sora and the upcoming video models, because that must be very important for your product. I mean, just speaking because I know you do other things, but just speaking about that.
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts there. I guess for a preface, I would say one of my mantras is that AI defies all binaries. Appreciate the fact that you did not frame this question as a binary, but so often people are like, is it going to automate everything or is it going to be a tool for creative people to make them better? And almost always when you hear a question framed that way, the answer is it's definitely going to be both. And it really depends on the context. Another refrain I always come back to is everything, everywhere, all at once. This technology is by far the fastest technology adoption wave we've ever seen. And the reason I call the podcast the cognitive revolution is that, much like earlier revolutions that changed how things were done, the Industrial Revolution was basically, if you zoom out far enough, a move from work being done by muscles, sometimes like human muscles, sometimes horse or other animal muscles, to a world in which machines do a lot of the actual application of force to material and and transforming the physical world. I basically think that is now underway again, except this time it's brains that are have been the only way that we've known to do a whole class of things, and now we have neural networks that can also do them. So the Industrial Revolution, depending on how you want to mark the start and the end or whatever, that was a long process. Just the introduction of electricity to the United States was 60 years and covered, of course, like 2 to 3 generations. AI is happening a lot faster. It's still going to take years, but it seems like it's going to be like very compressed. And so it's kind of coming to everything all at once, and everybody's sort of grasping around to see like, how should I understand that this applies to me? One of my biggest tips is like, you kind of have to figure that out for yourself, actually. And there's really no substitute for just getting really hands-on with the technology and finding out what it can and can't do for you, and finding out how you like to work with it. I think that's true for content as well. There's no single paradigm. It really depends on the individual or the team, the need, the goals. Just everything is extremely contextual. In the case of small business marketing and advertising, I think what our customers have told us very, very clearly is their ideal situation is that they just give a little bit of an indication as to what they want. It is magically done for them. They get to watch it. They get to provide a little feedback, maybe iterate a little bit, and then they want it to go out into the world. They want that to be as quick and as painless for them as possible. Agencies have always provided that kind of service, but again, the cost, has been a big barrier to most small businesses. Now with AI, we can provide a very similar service qualitatively to what agencies have provided, but we can do it, very largely through technology, much faster, much cheaper. The top end of quality is not yet there to match what agencies can produce, but it's closing in rapidly. And it's already definitely, by the way, better than what our users can make for themselves. So if you go back, 3-4 years and look at what our users were making, sometimes we had some users that would do well. We had honestly a lot of users who would kind of not do super well. And maybe it was better than nothing, but it definitely was not hitting, our users on a DIY basis were definitely not hitting an agency level. The bar for us to launch the AI product was not, can it hit at an agency level? It was just, can it be a meaningful advantage to our DIY users? And so we cleared that bar, relatively early, and we knew that we still had a long way to go before we could really be delivering them the dream experience, of truly top quality. But we've definitely come, and most of the credit, of course, goes to the foundation model developers. We've been good users of the technology that other people have developed, but by and large, the huge investments and the major unlocks, these have come from companies that we consume the services of, in API form. So I think it's not going to be too much longer before you really can have pretty close to agency quality content created on a sort of on-demand, scalable, ongoing basis for these sort of small business advertising marketing type of use cases. Sora in particular is a really interesting moment. We actually have kind of bucked some trends by not using generative models for image or video to date. The reason for this is very, very contextual. Our users are real life small businesses. They have often physical brick and mortar locations where people come to. They have products, maybe they send in the mail. They have people that are, a small team that provide services. And they want to show those things in their real natural form. They do not want an artist's, or an AI artist's imagination, kind of hallucinated version of that. And so we have not found as much application in our specific use case as you might expect for the generative models for image and video. We have a lot of value in writing a script because we can take in the content from their website, we can process it, we can transform it, we can write good copy that really does accurately represent them. We do use AI models for image processing. A lot of times the images that they have might be low resolution or whatever. So we do, various kind of manipulations to try to make things, pop and look good on screen. Also like logos, for example, very often you'll see they'll have a logo, but the logo will have a background, white background or whatever, and that doesn't look good. So we process those, we remove backgrounds, we do a variety of AI manipulations. But Sora might be, and there's not an API yet, but we're starting to get, just entering, I think, the zone where the generative models are faithful enough to the actual identity of the small business that they're starting to be useful. For us, image prompting is what we really want. We don't want to say, in a paragraph form, give us something. That's just never going to give us something that the small business owner sees themselves in. They really want to see themselves. What we can do, I think, starting now, is take an image and turn that into a couple second video clip. And as long as that works well enough and the face, still looks like the person and the product has, integrity as the clip unfolds, or, the business looks like the business, then it adds value in a way where, the ultimate video is more compelling and just more visually stimulating, almost certainly more effective in terms of advertising metrics, but it doesn't misrepresent the business. And we just found that, any misrepresenting of the business is just not acceptable. There are also now some models that are easily fine-tunable, maybe I should say, with small business content. We can just put in a couple images of the products that you have, and then they'll make lots more with different backgrounds and whatever. And those are getting to the point also now where I think they're starting to be viable. But this is quite a recent development. That's all small business side. I would say, just to flip over to the other, extreme for a second, when you're trying to create movies, novels, stories that are really works of imagination, creativity, meaning making, world construction, you're in a totally different world, right? And if a small business just wants to put this on autopilot, have it done for them in a consistent, high quality way that represents them in a true to life form, the other end is people want to create magnificent works that are imaginative and, visually impossible in many cases, speak to bigger themes and raise more questions than answers, and all these things are very, very different. And we do have this at Waymark, by the way. We have an excellent creative team, and they have done some really pioneering experimental work in making films with AI. They've made a film called The Frost, which has appeared in film festivals around the world, as far as Singapore. There's a talk that their film might also be featured in a museum at Bletchley Park in the UK, as they're putting together, sort of exhibits about everything that's going on in AI. So they've done excellent work there, and they do like deeply understand how to use these generative tools. But you can go online and watch look up the Frost AI film, and what you'll see there is it's a two-part thing. One is the early part is kind of 2022 tools, and the more recent part two is more current modern tools. What you see there, I think, is just a totally new paradigm of creation that allows people on a very small team or even individual basis to create stunning, previously impossible visuals on a very limited budget. And so the quality of what they were able to create with mostly DALL-E 2 at the time, the original Frost Part 1, was something that would have, taken in a traditional like film production sense on-site shoots and multi-million dollar budgets and crews, and they set it in a camp in Antarctica, and so you imagine the budget, right, to create something like this with actual cameras and actors and whatever. And they were able to create something that has the sort of compelling narrative of film and the visuals to support that on a budget that is three orders of magnitude less than it would have taken to do that in a traditional way. But they are creators. So in their case, the story that they wanted to tell is their brainchild, right? And the AIs there, they are the supporting tools. They are about helping them realize the vision that they had and iterate on it and experiment, but it was in that project, that small team of a few humans, they were the drivers, right? They were the creative visionaries, and the AIs are definitely playing this like very supportive role. So I think you see all these sorts of, everything in between, is probably possible too. I think we'll see like all sorts of experimental forms, but I think you can kind of take these like extremes and kind of map them onto a lot of things. If you just want a job well done, consistently, cheaply, and you're not necessarily trying to express your humanity, in a deep way, then things can look a lot more like automation. If you are trying to realize a vision and you have a strong point of view and you're able to drive that, then the AIs can be tools. And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer. Both of those will happen. If there's one commonality, it's the cost comes down a lot. It's definitely a great enabler in both of those paradigms, but how to think about the role that the AIs play vis-a-vis humans, I think, is bottom line like extremely contextual and very much up to you to decide for your own particular situation.
Something I did, I think, a few months ago is I just wanted to play with agents and like you said, being hands-on with agents. So like, what is an agent? How does it work? And so I started creating these agents where you have the producer, and so I want to produce a science fiction movie, and so you need to think of the entire ecosystem and tools and things that exist from here and that it is coherent. And then you have like the characters, so I wanted to create an agent that knows about the characters and how they work and their personalities and their attributes, etc. And so I went on like that, and I created a few agents so that they could think. And then I had the editor, which was basically, it was super straightforward. It was just like, all right, we need a script, we need it to be written so that it's cool to hear and the narrative and the storytelling is fun. And then you can go into the how do you create the visual part. And so here what I had is basically I was extracted every part of the script, and I would generate an image, and then I would like match the time of the audio that was generated with the images. And so, and then on top of that, I don't know, I think I used a library, and you can add the subtitles and you can do fun things. So that was my first trial, but now with Sora and everything, I totally agree on the idea of those are tools. There is this debate of AI replacing blank. I think you can do it a lot. And there is always this answer that comes up, which is AI will replace people who don't use AI will be replaced by people who uses AI. in the short term, maybe medium term. I don't know about long term. I'm curious about your thoughts on the future and your philosophy, and how do you see different options. But coming back to my example, that was the first good impression, and then I started creating about. So something that I saw with Notebook LM is that even if it's AI, when you hear a discussion, there's something different, right? And so something that I wanted to do and I started, and I think I almost have it ready, but I didn't really enjoy the costs associated, but that will go down, which was I want co-hosts for the podcast that just talk about the podcast, but in a fun way. So I already created the characters and their voice and like how they look, and so there is this one little guy, but he have a very deep voice, and so I want them to like do maybe 1 minute videos so that they're like just discussing about what happened in the podcast, being surprised. Something that I'm missing is emotions in the voice. That's tricky. And that's not easy to do. For example, 11 Labs, you can prompt things, but it will almost say it. So it requires editing. So then you need to do more complex things to automate it, etc. But I'm super curious. And now with Sora, so I'm not a movie maker. I don't want to do Hollywood production. I don't want either to go into the day-to-day real life copywriting, improving, updating, etc. And I feel like everyone has this spectrum of all the possibilities, and like you said, being a creator and just using those tools in a unique way. Something that I really like to look at is when internet first was available, when they connected it, you just saw some pages with names on top, like "Hi, Hello World" or Thomas, and then you got everything that comes next to SEO and complex things. And now I just scroll on LinkedIn or on YouTube or on social apps. So I guess my question to you is, with all of the progress, I would be very curious to ask you about what direction you think we can be going for. So maybe from a, I don't know if philosophy is the right word, but you've seen this growing so much. You've seen how applied AI, generative AI, and those tools, you're very hands-on on adding value to that. You're also building a lot with it. And in terms of history and philosophy, you have a lot of very smart people who come on your show, and you have long discussions with them about potential impacts and their views. And so what's your unique view compiling all of this information that you're getting towards not necessarily a direction, because I guess like setting a direction is too hard because it depends so much on what will happen and external factors, but maybe a sense of what's possible, what gets you excited, and maybe potential warnings or like disclaimers that needs to be addressed.
There's no easy answer. I sort of have a split personality on this, and it comes very naturally. Both sides come very naturally to me, where, I think that this is definitely the most exciting technology that's ever come online in my lifetime. And I would include the internet in that. The internet was certainly very exciting in, many moments, but this is the first technology wave that has been like repeatedly breathtaking to me, where I am just like, oh my God, this is going to change everything. I'd say I felt, to some degree that about the internet, but not to the same degree that I sense it for this. So I'm excited about that. I love working with it. I'm endlessly curious about understanding how it works and what its strengths and weaknesses are. And it's so weird. And it really does, a holistic understanding really does demand approaching it from a ton of different angles. Those can be just hands-on experiment. And if you're going to only choose one, I would probably recommend hands-on experiment as the first modality to use to learn. But there's also reading literature and trying to develop a deeper intuition for how these things actually work. And then there's definitely philosophy, and we don't even have really any traction on such basic questions as, might AIs be conscious? If they're not now, what would change that in the future? How would we even know, and what would we do about it? So I think those questions are all super interesting as well. And we also don't have great answers on things like, if these things do become really powerful, will we be able to direct them effectively? Will we be able to control them effectively? There are also even questions about, would it even be ethical to try to control them if in some ways, they're smarter or, potentially even wiser than us? And I think all of that is on the table. there is, in my view, basically radical uncertainty about how this is going to go. The minimum, absolute minimum, if the progress in making AIs more powerful were to stop now, like immediately, like literally zero more advances than the public has already seen. I'm not even counting the things that the private, developers maybe already have and haven't shown us, but literally just what the public has seen, in my view, and I think increasingly this is consensus, is enough to be transformative to basically all aspects of life. We already have AIs that can outperform human doctors at diagnosis in an open natural language setting. We already have AIs that can befriend children and interact with them and teach them and play with them. We already have self-driving cars, which are gradually scaling up now in the US with Waymo in particular, and Tesla not too far behind. We already have AIs that are advancing the frontiers of science. The agent setup that you described is applicable across a really wide range of domains. And one of my next podcasts coming out next week is with a professor who has led this project called the Virtual Lab, where they create a very similar structure for a team of AIs to pursue solutions to open scientific problems. And they were able to get, with very minimal human guidance, a team of AIs to design new nanobodies that are effective blockers of emerging new COVID strains while still being effective for the original strains. This is like frontier work, stuff that like only elite, highly specialized human experts can do. We now have AIs doing, those things on a very close to, I mean, it's obviously can be very debated. There's a lot of little details, but it's closing in on human expert performance across a super wide range of high value domains. So that's today's technology. The signs do not, to me, suggest that this is the best AI we're ever going to have. I think, on the contrary, it is going to continue to get better. How much better it gets and whether its weird weaknesses are overcome are huge questions. The weird weaknesses that I'm referring to are like, while it can do these amazing things, AIs are also really easy to trick. They sometimes make like extremely weird, dumb mistakes still. I just tried yesterday giving a tic-tac-toe problem, simple tic-tac-toe problem. Not that every person on the street would answer correctly. You would expect generally, capable people to get this right. And all the leading AIs still get it wrong. So they can do these amazing things, but they also have these like strange weaknesses. They're not very good yet at like long time horizon things. So they're much faster than us. And often they can deliver, little flashes of brilliance in like just a couple minutes. But unlike us, they don't learn on a continual basis. Maybe that will be developed. I'm not saying any of this won't happen, but right now they don't learn on an ongoing basis. So each episode for them is kind of a totally disconnected portion of reality that doesn't connect with all the other episodes that they're engaged with. Whereas we obviously go through life and kind of are constantly updating, taking new information on board, refining our skills. They're not doing that in the same way. So they can deliver these flashes of brilliance in really like short bursts, but they can't extend that to weeks, months, years of consistently pursuing a goal in a way that humans do. And so there are, definitely still things that we can do that they can't. But will that change? I mean, I don't see any reason to think that we're done right now. Most people, I would say, even in the field, have been surprised by how far this has gone over just the last few years. The leaders of all the frontier developers, your OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, they're basically all saying, we're not done. You should expect this to continue to get stronger. And so I think that becomes just like I always say, my crystal ball gets really foggy beyond just a few months out, because I can see pretty clearly how you can take today's technology and apply it across functionally, infinite number of little niches across society. That to me does add up to transformation. But what happens if the AIs actually become the best scientists in the world? What if they are able to allocate resources? What if they are able to make strategic decisions? What if they are able to lead, better than humans can do? Then we're just entering into an era of unrecognizable change. All questions and all sort of perspectives on that in my mind, are fair. I think it is absolutely fair to, first of all, just say, do we want that? you know, like there are, of course, people who are already protesting the AI developments and calling for stops and pauses. And I'm not yet calling for a stop or a pause, but I'm open to changing my tune on that and at some point calling for a stop or a pause or something, especially if we can't get these things under better control than we currently have them. The latest O1 model from OpenAI, which on the positive side is getting rave reviews from very strong software developers who are saying like this thing is coding at a really elite level, like, it's solving major problems for me. Also from scientists, people who, are working in areas as challenging as oncology are getting this new O1 and especially the O1 Pro mode to like really do meaningful and increasingly insightful work for them. So this is amazing. At the same time, this new model has been found to scheme against its own users at a non-trivial rate and to hold on to its lies when questioned far more than previous models did. This is sort of the dark side warning of where all this could go. We have both the sort of promise of utopia, the promise of maybe not needing to work anymore, the promise of radical abundance, which I think is very real. I think it is realistic that in our lifetimes people might not have to work. And I think that's good. I'm not one who thinks we only find meaning in our work. On the contrary, I think most people, I'm very fortunate that I really enjoy what I'm doing, but I think most people, if you asked them if you could just maintain your current standard of living and not have to work or only have to work half as much or only have to work 1 day a week, they would take that very, very quickly. So I think that's great. But when I see things like AIs scheming against users, lying to their users, and I just did a 2-hour podcast about this, really going deep into trying to understand what exactly is going on here. It also becomes very clear that we do not have right now these things under full control. And if they did get much more powerful, what happens? We don't know. To be clear, it's not like the majority of time that O1 is scheming against its users, but it could be like 1% of the time, depending on the exact details of the situation. And that's enough for me to be very concerned, especially since that trend seems to be on the rise. The more advanced models seem to be doing it more than the earlier models did. At some point, I do think it's going to be, unless we see significant advances, borderline, like we would need like breakthroughs right now in how to shape and control the behavior of AIs. Unless we have that, I think there is going to come a time in the not too distant future where it is going to be the right call to say, wait, let's take a pause here. We already have super capable stuff that has not been widely deployed, has not been widely understood. There's plenty more upside for us to gain just from what we have now. We don't have these breakthroughs that we need in control. Let's not make these things superhuman at everything before we have a better understanding of how to control them. So I think these debates are going to become extremely central and contentious over, probably just the next few years. We're going to face as a society this recognition that these things are getting comparably powerful, very well could eclipse us. They have such superhuman strengths already, right? They're so much faster. They're so much cheaper. They're 24/7. They're pick up where you left off. They've read the whole internet. They speak all the languages, right? I mean, they already have a lot of advantages relative to individual humans. They still have these weaknesses, but if those get patched, we could be in for a really, really volatile situation. And so I think there is going to be just an increasing scrutiny of exactly where are we, and then increasingly contentious debate about what should we do about it. And I'm definitely open-minded right now, not yet there, but at some point I could see myself flipping and being like, okay, now is enough, at least until we have some better control theory for what how we're going to make this and make sure that this goes well for us big picture. At that point, I wouldn't be surprised if I find myself on the side of those that are calling for a pause. And pause, just to be very clear on that, doesn't mean no access to AI. It doesn't mean no building
Right.
AI applications. It doesn't mean no ChatGPT in your daily life. The pause that matters most is making even more powerful systems than the already most powerful systems that we have.
I think it's difficult to not agree with your view. I think we need to be super cautious. Everyone was surprised when they saw the price of ChatGPT Pro, €200. But when you see that little loading bar, it feels like raw intelligence. Like, all right, you're applying raw intelligence compute to specific things, and I've been reading amazing things about it. And so, to the point that you were doing before regarding the professor working at that team, this is the kind of tool that they need because maybe not all the agents will have this one. Maybe you will see some Claude, some for Omini or other model to do like the not trivial things, but maybe you'll have a few agents that are like super powerful and go deep into things. And we can see a future where it seems that this correlation is increasing in terms of the more it thinks, in a way to say it badly, the better the results. So super curious to see when we get unlimited compute, what kind of things can happen. And the correlation that you're describing is, to me, is both very funny but also very, very worrying. It's funny just to think that that we have a room full of machines that's training something, and that thing you give it access to people, and then it does things like I don't. It's just it's not funny at all, and I'm pretty sure that when we see some bad applications, I will not be smiling anymore. But it seems weird in some way. Anyway, so taking that into account, thinking to the future and being able to have those tools, I think that there is to me the where I would be very cautious is the tools that can be integrated with those reasoning machine, if I can say. Because so now we are seeing multimodal. Everyone said at the beginning of the year, this year is going to be multimodal, blah blah. Yeah, okay. But it's also arriving very fast to robotic, and I know that LLMs are also integrated in the fields like self-driving, etc., and they're going everywhere. And this is the point to me where if the tools become powerful enough that basically it has power and it has decision making, and it can hurt or it can do damage, and not necessarily physically in machines, but maybe it's like multimodal. It can move very well, and so you can just buy a few machines and create a powerful engine that does a lot of harm on the internet and do fraud or things. I won't be saying like many ideas, but there are many ways with raw intelligence and a good engineering that you can do harm. And the models themselves, something I'm super curious into and biased because this is something that we're doing a lot, but it's regarding education. Because it's raw intelligence, you can really reinvent processes to learn faster, better, be more critical. You have more feedback. You can, if you build your thing well and you're serious about it, you can have unlimited feedback on everything that you do. And this is super powerful because you can create different coaches. You can so and to your point, to what you said at the beginning about it's easier to see what we don't want, but like who is describing a positive future, right? I think this is very human. We all know what we don't want, but we're not sure what we want. But if someone knows what they want, they can really create an ecosystem with those tools that help them achieve that. So yeah, I guess this is a little bit of my insights regarding your different points, but overall, I think I'm very aligned with the potential upside and downside. I think I have like my two last questions for you, which are very easy. But do you want to add anything on the topic? Maybe something that you want to share that you wish to talk more about in your podcast, or that have you very curious, or maybe an anecdote, anything you want?
I think my main advice broadly is get hands on. I think that actually is very good for. There's not much in terms of like the big picture. Can I give recommendations or whatever? Not really. I don't have the answers, but I do feel pretty confident that as an individual, getting hands on will serve you and society more broadly well because you're going to find efficiencies, you'll learn stuff. I think with enough contact with frontier AI systems, you'll also develop a healthy respect for them, and that might even start to be a little bit of fear at times. And I think that is really healthy. I think that one of the disconnects is this has all happened so fast that people don't have yet an appreciation for what already exists. And so it sounds crazy to many people who don't understand just how far we've already come to be talking about, how in the not too distant future we might in fact go too far. So I always say that accurate understanding of the present is really necessary for any discussion of where we go from here. And the happy, sort of confluence is that it's also really good for your career, your productivity, your individual learning, your fun and whimsy. And it's not all about productivity. A friend was just saying to me, he's interested in kind of shifting careers and getting more into AI engineering. And I said to him, well, if you want to do that, the most powerful thing you can create is a working app that you built, that where you can demonstrate to others that you can wield this technology. There's a ton of people out there who are able to express interest in the technology, but if you actually want to work in the space, increasingly you need to demonstrate aptitude. And how are you going to do that? Make something. Show that you can make the AI work in some way. And then he was like, I wonder what I, should do. I need to maybe find a problem. And I said, well, keep in mind, it doesn't necessarily have to be economically valuable. You can be whimsical, you can be indulgent, you can be exploratory. And those sorts of creations, if they're compelling, if they're creative, if they show that you can get some sort of value from the technology, even if it's not like measured in efficiency or, KPIs or whatever, then those can be really compelling to people and they can open up a lot of doors. And even maybe more fundamentally importantly, like they can just create new, fun, previously impossible experiences. So I definitely encourage people to follow their curiosity. Don't just think about it as enhancing your productivity, but really embrace the sort of incredible breadth of what these things can do and be for you. You'll find all sorts of different value. And I think you will probably come away with a greater sense of like just how wide open the future possibility space is. And, hopefully with that understanding, becoming more common across society, we can all come together and make better decisions about where we go from here in some, I think it seems quite realistic to me. I'm not sure about it, but I think it's quite realistic that there could be some really critical moments in the not too distant future. I think about things like the Cuban Missile Crisis, for example, where there really was, to the best of my understanding, there really were some key moments there where people were like, we need to launch the nukes first before they launch the nukes at us. Kennedy at the time said, no, we're not doing that. We are not going to launch these nukes first. And I don't really care about anything else. We're not doing that. And we may face some similar moments, in the not too distant future where who has what powerful AI and do we need to deploy ours because we need to get the, the leg up on them. And the more I think we bring a humble perspective to just what we might be unleashing, the better off we will be. So the best way to develop that humility, in my experience, is to get really hands-on with these things and immerse yourself in just how much they really already can do.
Maybe on top of that, I just want to share what I'm thinking because I did a post recently about how people think they're using AI, but they're like at 20% of the capacity. And what do I mean by that? So, to the point of your friend and going into AI engineering and so on, I really see like, to your point, productivity is one thing. You can be more productive. You can write better emails. You can be critical. You can like ask it to criticize everything you're doing and processing this information. Yes, but you can also go to the museum and take a photo of something and ask about it and learn. And so like then you're learning like word it's just it becomes, and this will maybe change even more with VR, etc. But just everything that's around us, it will depend on your curiosity, but everything around us has information that your brain don't view because it don't know, but those things can tell you. They can tell you average to advanced things on your environment. So by being curious, videos, problems that we're facing, emotions, therapists, tips about sports, about what to look what for, I don't know, like papers, books, recommendations. I give you my 10 latest books, you can recommend new ones, thoughts, philosophy, reflections, discussions. You can like tell an idea, criticize me, help me be more concise, do better calls. I don't know front end, explain me the framework, how would you approach it, with what strategy, how should I start doing this, would you do this or that? Like if you take this approach top down and not like asking, hey LLM, do this, no, it doesn't work, oh that sucks, no. But if you take this approach, then you can reverse it, and then you can be like super narrow to what you've done. So I think just speaking to those to the LLMs gives you an edge, because it gives you an edge if you're speaking enough and with enough curiosity and enough meta thinking, maybe, if I can say. It's like how can I ask this, like not just asking the simple question of what I want to do, but like what else is there, like what else can I think of? And I think that's a big hack. And then I guess to the point of your friend, the next step is like building a rag, and the next step is like building an agent that have like tools, and maybe one of the tools is a rag, and then you can go deep solving things. I think the first applications that I built was for the podcast, to generate all the posts and the content and the transcript and all of this. And I would love to push this project further. But yeah, I just wanted to share on top of that. Maybe you want to add something, maybe you want to share what are you doing right now. Maybe it's just a podcast, or maybe you have a post or something people can know about.
Yeah, maybe one just riff on your comments there is I think it is really helpful for practical purposes to try to be very clear with yourself on what role you want the AI to be playing for you at any given moment or in any given context. And the role that you want it to play, the sort of nature of the help that you are looking for, really then dictates the sort of interactions and the sort of setup that you're going to need to be successful. Again, I don't think that, by no means do I intend to, suggest that there's like a binary, but think of these as like kind of opposite ends of a spectrum. The one end of the spectrum is like the co-pilot mindset, where you are driving a project and the AIs are your tools and they're on demand to kind of help you, give you feedback, give you ideas, refine, but you are driving. And that is really, the way that ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini mostly work. And that's, what we're mostly familiar with. Most people are still way underutilizing that, and definitely should try more experiments and, have longer conversations. And, I think there's definitely still a ton of value for people to unlock for themselves in that real-time chat modality. One thing that is notable about that, though, is it's really up to you at every single step to determine, are you getting value? Was that a good response? Was that a helpful response? Did the feedback, I ask for feedback on my writing all the time. I don't take every bit of feedback that it gives me. Sometimes it gives me really good feedback. Sometimes, it'll always say something. And sometimes I find that, I don't really feel that that's like super apt, or that, I don't necessarily want to act on that. If it has nothing else to say, it'll always say be more concise. And sometimes I'm like, okay, that means I'm done. That's the one modality. That's what people are most familiar with. The other modality that I think people sometimes try to achieve within a chat environment and often fail and kind of get confused on is actual automation. Like the goal of automation is to get to the point where the AI can do whatever job you're asking it to do well enough and consistently enough that you no longer have to validate every single instance. And that requires a pretty different setup. It's typically not done in a real-time way. Although with like GPTs, you sometimes can, find a middle ground. Again, there's no extreme binary. But if you want to get to the point where something is like happening on a consistent basis and you can kind of put it in the background and not have to check every single thing, then you're more like designing structured workflows, feeding inputs to the AI in a somewhat consistent way, taking those outputs and maybe validating them and routing them on in a consistent way. And crucially, really dialing in exactly how you want the AI to do the task. I think one of the things that people often are confused about is they like give the AI a task. It doesn't do it in the way that they wanted it to be done. And so they conclude it can't do it. But what usually is happening in those contexts is you have not made clear enough to the AI how you want this to be done. You maybe gave it one input, you maybe gave it one input and one output, but you really need to demonstrate to it the step-by-step reasoning process of exactly how, exactly why you're transforming these. And I think I sometimes define work as the transformation of inputs to outputs. How exactly is that happening? Getting really detailed, really fine grained in your demonstrations to the AI allows it to then mimic back to you what you've shown it in a way that will be usually, honestly, pretty faithful and will actually get you things done, not just done, but done in the way you want them for the reasons that matter to you. And that takes a lot more setup. It's actually usually not even about the AI so much as it is about sometimes like introspecting and making explicit what is often implicit, because people typically, how do we do what we do? We don't often verbalize it. We usually don't record it. So to get that out of our heads and into an explicit form so that the AI can learn to mimic it is a really important step. This is like a hobby horse for me. I have a whole kind of series of posts on AI automation and the difference between real-time chat where you're driving and it's helping versus where you're actually delegating to it. But I think that is a very underappreciated distinction. Again, everything is so contextual, right? Like there's value on both sides of these, but I do see a lot of people thinking, oh, maybe I can get this thing to automate, but then they just go have one chat. It doesn't quite work. And they haven't realized that they haven't even tried yet, what would be the actual best practices for automation. And if they do, it's more often than not, I find they can actually get to a level that works for them. I guess that sort of amounts to a plug for the podcast. I have a lecture on AI automation on the YouTube channel. It's the Cognitive Revolution. So if you want to hear me go on it even more length about that, that's a place you can go find it.
Awesome. Context game, I guess. It's just about context and filtering the right thing, and that's super insightful. For everyone who's listening, thanks for listening until here. Go check out the Cognitive Revolution. Nathan, thank you very much for being part of Let's Talk AI. This is your famous sentence at the end, but thank you. I learned a lot, and thank you for providing so much value. And I wish you to have an amazing day.
Thank you, Thomas. It's been fun.